Welcome, everybody, to the Simply Put podcast show, the greatest place where I can express my opinions on a specific video game. And today's video game is Borderlands. Borderlands was made by Gearbox Software. The first independent game was Brothers in Arms, and before then they helped port various Valve titles, mostly for the Half-Life series. It was initially released on the 20th of October 2009 for PS3 and Xbox 360. Then a few days later it was released for PC. The reception was mostly positive, despite it being a new IP at the time, and it did get very much high praise all around, with a few gripes here and there. And so, I played Borderlands when I was around 12 years old, and first playing it was so awesome. It felt like a breath of fresh air, because before that time, I played Fallout 3 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 1, and much like those games at the time, it differed from the greens and the greys. Despite it not being the most colourful game out there, at the time it really did stand out. That paired with the cel-shaded art style, it did look very unique. A few years later, I was given my very own copy, and I played it the entirety of the way through solo. I was so captivated and drawn in with the characters, the loot, everything. Everything was great. It wasn't until a few years later I talked a friend into buying a copy for himself, as he didn't know what to play at the time, and he thought it looked cool. And that's when the true Borderlands experience was had. Borderlands is a game built for co-op. Even though I immensely grew to love it on solo, with friends it takes it to an entire new level. It gives that sense of camaraderie, and with the humour of the game, made it even the bad jokes a joke within themselves. The inside jokes then sprung from there, and eventually we had a 4-player team of friends to play with. So Borderlands holds a great time in my life of friends and good times. So with that said, let's talk about my opinions on what Borderlands did good, setting and the ecosystem. What better place to start than where Borderlands is? Pandora. Pandora stands out to me for a few reasons. First, it treads that line between alien and reality. And second, it's believable. It goes alien without going too alien for me. There's some ancient aliens on the ground, but which can tread that line and pay off. However, most things you see are humanoid or creatures inspired by Earth creatures. Skags are wild dogs, Scythids are slugs, that sort of thing. Borderlands has that uncanny valley feeling of it being Earth and not at the same time, and it really does pay off in the end for a more gritty and grounded experience, despite it being off-world. It's also believable due to the ecology and the habitat of Pandora they've created. Everything seems thought out and very much purposeful, and very much feels like a great designer was on board. I'm talking more about the moments when animals fight other animals or humans fight aliens, and then on top of that, you have their habitats are even more thought out. Skags live in dens that are just holes dug out of the walls. Scythids live only in deserts and are poisonous, hence their bright coloured skin, and so on. All of these factors come together into making Pandora feel so alive and so believable. It's a really well put together setting and world. Fight for your life. Personally, I haven't seen any other game utilise this feature. It's a difficult one really, isn't it? Because some could say it's an annoyance at later levels, as you're constantly going down and up and down, or that you can't move as well. Therefore, if you get put into a fight for your life behind a rock, for instance, you can't kill anyone. So overall, though I do like the mechanic, in that it certainly helps in solo, which for some people is an oversight, isn't it? For me, fight for your life in solo is necessary, and it's practically needed, with no one to revive you if things go bad. It keeps you in that moment, where instead of respawning and running all the way back, you can just get back up and get back into the fight. Later on it becomes almost a strategy in a way. On if you're about to go down, you can position yourself near a weakened enemy to get back up and shoot him. I think Fight for Your Life has a lot of intricacies, and you can tell that in Borderlands 1 it was very much a prototype. You can tell it's got a few kinks here and there. Thankfully in the sequels, however, they do build on this, but for now, it does go into the good section of today's show. Did references right? Humour. I'm trying to steer clear from humour and soundtracks in my good sections, primarily due to the sheer subjectivity that is of them. You know, some people find jokes funny, some people find music funny, not good, whatever. However, seeing as though I blended the references and humour together in this one, I do have a point to make. This is a reflection on where the series has gone and where it is still going. And I strongly believe that Borderlands 1's sense of references, self, humour, was done perfectly. It's the best the series have done. And why is that? And it's simple. Subtlety. Borderlands is a great example on how you can have these references and pop culture references in your game without it feeling cringy, without it feeling phoned in or cheesy. And I wish I could say the same for the sequels. Most of the references are hidden in Borderlands and have to be found and worked out, and like, oh, that's from that, oh, that's from that. Sure, there are some obvious ones, but for the majority, they are subtle in adding some comedic relief from the downtime you would have in the game to even further brighten up the world. Borderlands, in my opinion, Borderlands 1 more specifically, did the references right. DLC. I won't talk too long on the DLC, I'll make this one quick, simply due to wanting to do a future episode on them, but they are in the good section, so there you go. And so that was the good stuff out of the way. Now let's jump headfirst into the bad things Borderlands does. Oh boy. Story and ending. Oh boy, we are starting with the big one. Oh, the overall story and ending, probably the biggest complaint for Borderlands was the ending. And I cannot deny it. That ending was so bad. So bad. And I've asked myself why? Why is it that bad? And was it the time constraints they had? No, it was done on purpose. Because here's the thing, if you wanted to make it fake, you know, at the end, if you wanted to make it a trap all along, you need to set that up. The only reason people felt so ripped off was because they were expecting the vault filled with loot. Throughout the game, you hear talk of the vault. No warning signs. No, ooh, it could be bad. Only good things about the vault. You're collecting key pieces from people who are holding them in a chance to get to the vault. It's your goal at the end of the day. And for it to not be there, you can imagine would leave a huge sour taste in everyone's mouths. All they needed to do was introduce a skeptical character or hints throughout, making us believe actually maybe it's not real, maybe it's a trap. But due to the DLC, I think they did learn their lesson in this and understood the expectations they give. So even though it was a mistake, it still does have to be in the bad section due to it just ruining so many people's opinions on the overall game. Some people took their scores down for the ending, and with good reason. I think overall, the story was okay. But there wasn't too many side stories to have, and so it made the quest for the vault maybe drag on a little bit too long. And because it wasn't the best paced game either. So that is why the story and the ending go into the bad section of today's show. Needed interesting boss fights. The most interesting was the Rack Hive and the Destroyer. The rest was humanoids really, weren't they? But I did see them trying somewhat to design actual boss fights. I remember the turret section very well, on having to dodge behind cover to work your way up this hill to the turret. But most just felt like bullet sponges. There wasn't any weak spots or environmental interactions to change how the boss fight went. They did feel quite bland. And that's a shame, as you have this weird, wonderful world, and yet you just spent 10 minutes shooting some guy in the face with a shotgun repeatedly. Again, they do learn and apply this to the DLC and sequels. However, it's a shame they didn't see it sooner and realize that some boss fights were just boring. I'm not saying how you should design a boss fight. I'm not saying I'm an arbiter on what's right and wrong in a boss fight, but saying that, it just looks like they just put two people in a room with guns and one had triple health. It wasn't very memorable, but again, the DLC sorts it out. Overall skills. This is another common criticism that I completely agree with. The skill trees in Borderlands are 90% of the time percentage boosts. You see what I did there with the night? Never mind. Like 10% faster reload, 5% gun damage, that sort of thing. It's boring. It's boring. Numbers are fun and all, but those minuscule stat increases felt so undeveloped. The times when it did change your skill though, add in like missiles to your turret, is when things got really interesting. And it's just so sad that it wasn't there more often. I've heard another criticism being that if they added another active ability, that would improve the game. However, I don't fully agree with that. I'm on the mindset of sorting out one active ability first before they move on to making multiple. I would much rather have a robust, well-designed skill tree than another skill entirely. Until they get that down, I don't think another skill would help the situation whatsoever. Cars felt unnecessary. Only a short one for this, but is it me? Or do the cars in Borderlands feel like a month before release edition? Like, some of the roads you drive on don't feel like you should be driving on them at all. They don't find that great balance, ever, do they? Between driving and walking. You either drive too little or too much, or you end up walking too much and too little. It's an odd one. But I feel like they would have to redesign the entire maps to fix it, and hence why it's probably still there. But the cars, for me, just felt like they were glued on. But maybe that's just me. And that was all my opinions I wanted to say on Borderlands. So Borderlands could have been a little more. It did feel safe. It did feel contrived and constrained in places, and either that's due to time or money or not wanting to take too much of a risk. But note that they did address most of these points in the sequels and DLCs. For Borderlands' sake, it is a game made for co-op. I can guarantee that if you're an FPS fan or a fantasy fan or an RPG fan, then you will love Borderlands with friends. Whether you enjoy it solo, however, would be a different argument, as going back to solo recently made it into a different game. For me, I enjoy it. However, that is my personal opinion. And with that is the end of today's show. If you have any opinions of your own, please comment them down below, expressing your good and bad points. Thank you so much for watching. I have been James, and you have just watched the Simply Put podcast show. Goodbye.